And so Queensland will have 2 purpose-built quarantine facilities. The Commonwealth is backing one here on Defence land at Pinkenba near Brisbane Airport. There'll be rooms for 1,500 people by the middle of next year.
Hey everyone, this isn't the usual video. This is more like a life update and less about psychology, less about Bible studies, and more about the fact that essentially, living in Australia, you have very few options. And no doubt this is something that a lot of people are experiencing in other places. And it's one of those situations where it's like, if I want to visit my family interstate, if my family wants to visit me, that is something that is extremely difficult to do. Tasmania is about to open the borders in about a month's time, and most of my family is in Western Australia, so their borders are still currently closed as well. Our respective states have been pretty much totally isolated for almost 2 years. And if you've ever been to Australia and you've gone to places which are like not the eastern seaboard where most of the population lives, then you will understand that the population of most of Australia is extremely sparse, very isolated in general, and you have to travel long distances in order to see people. And in the states of Tasmania and Western Australia, it's been extremely difficult to do fairly ordinary things like visiting the elderly. So my dad is 80 and most of his friends are in their 80s or their 90s, and a whole bunch of them are in nursing homes. And so my dad and my stepmother have had to get inoculated, and it's been a year since they have visited their friends in the nursing home. And when someone has dementia, like their friends do, they can decline a lot in a year. So they are finally able to go and visit now. And of course, my particular state of residence also has similar restrictions around visiting nursing homes and around medical facilities. So one of my physical therapists is basically going to lose his practice because he won't comply and he's not allowed to practice without it. And the Prime Minister keeps saying that it's not going to be mandatory, it's not going to be enforced, except that it is. Living in Australia, I have had to be extremely careful about what I talk about, especially on social media, because there are new laws in place now since the lockdowns, which give special privileges to law enforcement, that they are allowed to remotely break into your devices without your knowledge and without your consent, and go through everything in your phone, in your computer, in your tablet, whatever. And you've probably seen some of the videos out there of people being arrested for Facebook posts. So even though I did not want to get this particular thing, I have. Because if I don't, it means that I won't see certain people. And so this kind of heavy-handed tactics of coercion is what we now live with. And it does make you sick. The lollipop. The lollipop makes you sick. So I got my second lollipop, and 4 days later, I am still sick. I had 2 days of fever, and I have had 2 days of headache and nausea. My particular situation is not unique or different. I know probably at least 4 or 5 people who have had the same experience. And it would have been nice to be allowed to wait until my school holidays when I'm not about to sit my exam. But the Tasmanian government put a time limit on it, which was the 31st of October. So the 31st of October, you had to have your first one. And then 3 weeks later, you had to have the second one. So there's no choice. There's no choice about when. There's no choice about whether you're happy to be sick for a week and lose, I mean, I've lost $300 from not being able to work. My job is casual, and if I'm not there, I don't get paid. So this has cost me time, this has cost me money, this has cost me health. And the argument can be made that obviously getting sick from the real thing would be 10 times worse, and it probably is. But this is the thing that I wanted to talk about today, is people playing God. If you read the books of Jeremiah and Isaiah and Daniel, it talks about how God sent the Babylonian army as a consequence of Israel's disobedience to God. So they turned away from God, they started making their own idols, doing their own thing. They originally wanted their own king. That was kind of the start of it, when they wanted a human king instead of God as their king.
But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." So Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now therefore, heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them, and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them."
And so God gave them Saul. And Saul was essentially what people could expect from a human king. He looked the part. He was a head above everyone else in terms of stature. He was a very tall man. And he was very good looking and strong and seemed to be an excellent leader. And then he became totally tyrannical, totally disobedient to God, and a crazy murderer. So, of course, years and years later, when Israel had just become so depraved that they barely resembled the people of God. I mean, Israel, even like in the first week of being the people of God, they built themselves a golden calf. When it came to following God, they just sucked. And so God kept trying to show them why things didn't work out for them. It's like, you keep trying to do my job yourselves, and that's why it doesn't keep working out. So they had Saul as a king, and then they had David, and David was a man after God's heart. So he was essentially almost a shadow, an archetype for Jesus. But he was still human, and he was still fundamentally flawed. And even though his reign was pretty good and Solomon's was okay, in the end, Israel just couldn't stay faithful to God. So the Babylonian Empire invades, and they cart off most of the people to Babylon in exile as slaves. And this is the thing. People seem to think that terrible leaders are not the will of God, but they are. Is this particular cure the mark of the beast? No, it's not, because it's missing one fundamental element, which is that it's not tied to a particular person in terms of worshipping that person instead of God. So the mark of the beast is characterized by the worship of a human being. So this is not the mark, but it is judgment. The church has not been doing its job. Far from being salt and light, we pretty much just resemble everyone else. And so people who buck against these heavy-handed mandates, you're defying God. And I know that that probably sucks to hear because it's not just. And that's the point. The point is that we are supposed to learn what happens when human beings attempt to play God. What happens when human beings mess around in a laboratory and play God? Whether it's creating something in the first place, which then causes a huge worldwide shutdown, or whether it's playing around with things in the lab to try and fix that problem and it doesn't, or whether it's human beings attempting to control an entire population through coercion and heavy-handed techniques. This is the judgment of God. This is Him showing us exactly how it plays out when we attempt to be Him. There's an old saying which says, you get the leaders that you deserve, or rather, you get the leaders that you vote for. And that is true. People want the Sauls. They want that king of the humans. They want to be that king of the humans. They want to be God. But human beings suck at that job. In all of recorded human history, when have we ever solved our own problems? What happens when you have several billion belligerent tiny gods stamping their feet? What you get is a world of chaos. And that's what humans create. We create chaos. God creates order out of chaos, but we create chaos. We don't create order out of chaos. And it's time that we put aside our own egos and stop being so narcissistic. Because judgment might be God allowing us to experience the consequences of our actions, but it is primarily an opportunity for us to turn to Him. It's supposed to be the prompt that pushes us far enough that we realize our need, that we stop fighting the current and actually ask for help. So rather than protesting, why don't people try praying? Why don't we try fasting? The prayer group that I belong to, we're about to embark on a week, Monday to Friday, of fasting and praying. So we are skipping breakfast. And if you would like to join us, you're more than welcome to do so, because all you have to do is skip breakfast and spend that time that you would ordinarily spend eating or preparing your breakfast. Spend that time praying. As it says in the Bibles, we need to pray for our leaders, whether they are good ones or bad ones, it doesn't matter.
Therefore I exhort, first of all, that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Saviour, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth.
Pray for forgiveness for the people who have been playing God, people who have been experimenting with things that they shouldn't be experimenting with, people who have been messing around with nature, messing around with other humans' lives. Pray for forgiveness for them, and pray that people don't have too bad an experience from the consequences. Pray for healing in the hearts and minds of people. If you have any of your own thoughts and ideas about what else we can pray for, then leave that in the comments. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Take care out there, and I will see you next time. Bye.